Hey, welcome back to another video. At the risk of sounding like every channel that's ever used the Sonic franchise as a punchline, the late 2000s were an odd time for Sonic. A lot of people have called this the dark age of the franchise, and while I don't really agree with that, it's hard to deny that there were a lot of rough releases at the time. Sonic 06, Sonic and the Secret Rings, Sonic Genesis. The series wasn't exactly at a high point. But among all that stuff, there was one particular game that got a lot of shit that it didn't really deserve. 2009's Sonic and the Black Knight. A sequel to the aforementioned Sonic and the Secret Rings, Black Knight was the second and final entry in the Sonic storybook series, which mixed the franchise with storybook settings. Secret Rings was themed after 1001 Nights, and this one is based on Arthurian legends. But you probably didn't need me to tell you that, given it's called Sonic and the Black Knight. I was just starting to get involved in the online gaming world in 2010, and even then there was a lot of animosity towards this game, largely just because Sonic had a sword. There are certainly some legitimate complaints, but most of what I heard at the time was people going, "Sonic's got a sword? Lame," and writing the game off based on that. However, if you ask me, Sonic and the Black Knight is good, actually, and I want to stick up for this longtime favorite of mine. The gist of the story is that Sonic gets summoned by the wizard Merlina into her world to help deal with the titular Black Knight, who is in fact King Arthur himself, having become corrupted by the immortality that comes with the scabbard of Excalibur. Eventually, it's revealed that King Arthur was merely an illusion conjured by Merlin, and the true villain of the story is Merlina, having foreseen the tragic end of the kingdom and wanting to preserve it as it is for the rest of time. As you can imagine, that plan doesn't work out, and thanks to his own sword Caliburn, who turns out to be Excalibur, Sonic gains a 6th suit of golden armor and defeats Merlina. Admittedly, the story does not sound like much on the surface, but buried within is a message that I adore. Merlina wants to avoid the tragedy she foresaw by stagnating the world, but that's no way to live. Everything comes to an end, and it might be sad, but that just means you need to live life to the fullest. It's a great message that I try, and frequently fail, to live by. Plus, I just really like how Sonic is written in this game. He's told early on in the story by Merlina that this quest will basically make him a villain, because he is killing the king, but he goes on anyway because stopping a nigh-immortal ruler who's gone mad with power is the right thing to do. He even takes a hell of a beating from Merlina herself at the end of the game for the same reason, that stopping her is just what he needs to do. He's not the kind of guy to back down even if it's not exactly the smartest choice. He's a hero and he does the right thing. Dude even helps the Knights of the Round Table mere moments after they try to kill him, stopping Gawain from taking his own life in shame due to being beaten by Sonic, and saving Percival from falling to her death after their duel. Then, at the end of the game, directly after Merlina was trying to kill him and stagnate the world, he shows her kindness, delivering the message about living life to the fullest. It's not the deepest writing ever, but given the usual simplicity of most Sonic stories and the one-note characterization of the cast, it really stands out. Shiro Miyakawa, who wrote this game as well as several other Sonic games, has said he's most proud of this game's story, as well he should be, because it's a great one. And the quality of the story is only elevated by the fantastic voice work. This is one of the last games to feature the 4Kids voice cast, and it really is some of their best. I've always mostly liked Jason Griffith's Sonic, but in a lot of the games it's maybe a bit too wacky sounding, if that makes sense. By the time this game rolled around though, he'd toned it down a bit and it worked much better. And while I'm not much a fan of his shadow voice these days, I do have to admit he does a pretty good job in this game. We don't get too much of her, but Lisa Ortiz has a very interesting twist on her Amy voice for this game, since Amy's taken on the role of the Lady of the Lake. It's a little more calm and almost regal, very fitting for the character, but it is a little strange since it is different from how Lisa Ortiz usually played it. I'm not going to go over everyone else in detail, but suffice to say they do a fantastic job as well. And playing through this game again reminded me just how much I love Dan Green's Knuckles. The music kicks a whole lot of ass too, and while that is par for the course for Sonic games, Black Knight's soundtrack really does deserve extra credit. You've got your fair share of hard rock tunes from several talented composers like series regular Jun Sonoe, Richard Jacques, and Howard friggin' Drawson, who I most associate with the equally kick-ass music of the 2010 Splatterhouse reboot. And those are just the level themes. You've also got some truly outstanding vocal songs. Crush 40 delivers their usual brand of awesome with songs like Fight the Night and Through the Fire, and the final boss theme, With Me by Emma and Tina from All Ends, is one of the most notable tracks in the whole franchise. But the real standout of the lyrical songs is the game's credits theme, Live Life. This is another Crush 40 track, but it's much slower than their usual fare. It plays into the moral of the game's story, as you could probably imagine from the name, and to this day it's still in the running for best vocal song in the series for me. So yeah, the music kicks ass and the story is great, but you know just as well as I do that those aren't the things people were complaining about and still aren't really. So, how's the gameplay? Admittedly, it's already in a weird spot thanks to its shared DNA with Sonic and the Secret Rings, which has gameplay that barely works. But from the get-go, this is a much better playing game. If you've ever had the misfortune of playing Secret Rings, you'll know that that game had you moving by tilting the Wii Remote, a system that sounds simple, but was so incredibly finicky, you're definitely going to end up more tilted yourself. Black Knight improves on this immediately by having the Wii Nunchuck as a requirement with Sonic's movement on the analog stick. You know, like a normal fucking video game. Just by virtue of that alone, Black Knight is a much better feeling game than its predecessor. We're not totally free of motion controls though, and that's where the sword stuff comes in. Rather than attacking through homing attacks or spin dashes, combat is handled with Sonic's sword, and you probably don't need me to tell you that you attack by swinging the Wii Remote. Really, it's more like waggling the Wii Remote since this ain't no Skyward Sword. All the game is looking for is a motion from the remote. This is definitely one of the more legitimate potential issues with the game. The gameplay is really not all that varied or involved. Despite the better movement from Secret Rings, you're still on rails with every level essentially being a straight line. And the combat is pretty one note since you're just swinging the Wii Remote over and over again, maybe blocking with the Z button occasionally. But you know what? I've played through this game plenty of times over the years and never have I felt that it was boring, despite that when you look at it on paper, it probably should be dull as hell. The levels are pretty short, so they usually end before you get tired of one particular stage, and most enemies only take a couple of hits to kill, so you're not sitting there wailing on one bad guy until he drops dead. The varied environments keep anything from looking too samey, and there are other objectives to complete in the stages, so if you do get tired of the get to the goal stuff, there are other options at your disposal to break up the pace a bit. And something that I think is really cool is that you get to play as the other Knights of the Round Table later in the game, so you can also change the pace that way, though that option doesn't unlock until later on. If there's one thing gameplay-wise I will complain about though, it's the platforming. Maybe I'm just bad, but anytime Black Knight asks you to do any real platforming is when it starts getting really janky. Jumping is a little stiff, and it's really hard to readjust yourself after a jump, so often I'd find myself overshooting platforms and falling into a pit. Especially when playing as Percival, since it seems like basically everything in her arsenal is designed to propel her forward, and that makes it damn near impossible to stop yourself if you overshoot. Thankfully, there's not too many times when you'll need to platform, so it isn't a game-breaking issue, but it is one that annoys me every time I play through this one. There's even a particularly annoying stage in the latter half of the game called the Shrouded Forest that features these logs you're supposed to jump off of to get over these thorny branches, and I've never been able to nail this. Half the time it launches me right into the thorns. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or if I'm using the wrong character or whatever, but it's always given me shit. It's also worth mentioning that this game is really short. Like, I recorded my whole playthrough of this from start to finish, and it's less than 3 hours. Granted, I have played this game a lot, and that was me skipping all the optional side missions and stuff, but still, it's not exactly a very meaty game. The bosses are kind of forgettable too. Most of them are just one-on-one fights with the other knights that boil down to blocking for a bit and then attacking when you have an opening. There are some standouts though, like the true fight you get with King Arthur and Avalon, which gave me so much shit when I was a kid, and the game's final boss, which I long ago named my favorite boss in the series. I don't know if I'd go that far nowadays, but it is a really fun battle that I love to go back to, only helped by With Me being such a kick-ass final boss theme. Despite those complaints though, I just really like playing Sonic and the Black Knight. Yeah, I get annoyed anytime I have to do platforming. Yes, waggling the Wii Remote both makes me look like an idiot and kinda hurts my wrist, and certainly the idea is out there. But none of that changes the fact that when I'm going through a volcano, or doing this awkward fight with a dragon, I'm having a lot of fun. If you've ignored Black Knight over the years because the idea of Sonic with a sword seemed dumb, I'd really suggest checking it out. You might be surprised. Secret Rings is definitely a shit show though. That's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, then please consider giving it a like. It helps me out a lot. And subscribe if you want to keep up with the future videos that I make, stuff that I talk about. a lot of Sonic in the future, but I do talk about other things and will talk about other things. You can follow me on Twitter, which is linked in the description, where I talk about the stuff that I'm playing or reading or watching or whatever, so you can kind of get an idea of what videos might be coming in the future. Down there is also my Patreon, so you can throw a few bucks my way if you want to support me directly and get yourself some perks. But if you don't want to, or you're not in a position to do so, that's perfectly okay. Just watching the videos and sharing them around is more than enough. That's all for now. Have a good day, and I will see you guys next time.